Welcome back. Today we're going to continue our conversation about market failures by looking at different types of goods, predominantly public goods as well as common resources, and trying to identify not only the characteristics that define these types of goods, but also explain options for solving the market failures that occur when these particular goods are produced. So when it comes to the type of goods that can be produced, we will classify them using two different characteristics. One is excludability. To be excludable means that only I get to use the good. I can prevent you from accessing it. I can charge you a price, for example, so that you can't just walk into a store and take a good. You have to come in and pay for it. The other characteristic is rivalness. A good is rival when I can consume the good, and my consumption of that particular good prevents you from consuming the same good. So the answer to whether the good is excludable or not, rival or not, will determine what type of good we're talking about. As it turns out, there are four different types of goods based on these characteristics. The one that we've been dealing with so far this year are what are known as private goods. They are both excludable and rival. That is, I can prevent you from having access to them unless you pay me, and my consumption of that good prevents you from consuming it. If I eat a loaf of bread, you cannot eat that same loaf of bread, and you cannot have that loaf of bread unless you pay me. So it's both excludable and rival. Then there are what are known as public goods. Those are goods that are non-excludable and non-rival. Not only does my consumption not impact your ability to consume the good, but I cannot stop you from consuming the good. So my decision to sit inside of a public school doesn't prevent you from using that same school. And I cannot stop you from accessing the public school because you have a right to a free public education. The challenge with public goods is that they create a market failure. When left to our own devices, individuals will produce fewer goods than what are socially optimal. That's because my marginal personal benefit is less than the marginal social benefit. The marginal social benefit is the sum of all of our personal benefits. And if we were to add all those together, it would justify a greater production and consumption of these particular goods than if we were left to our own devices. So, for example, street lights are a public good. They're not excludable. I can't prevent you from taking benefit from the light being produced at night from a street light, and your use of the light doesn't stop me from using the light. So it's both non-excludable and non-rival. Now, the challenge with public goods is it does create a free rider problem. So free riders are people who benefit from the good but choose not to help support it financially or pay for that good. And as a result, it leads to an inefficiently low production of the goods. And you've experienced free riders all the time in school. Group projects are a classic example of the free rider problem because you'll have some people that are willing to work hard, and you've got other people that are willing to just sort of accept whatever the group gets and provide nothing to the project that's being produced. And so what ends up happening is the quality of the good is sort of less than it should be if everyone were pulling their own weight. So here's an example. Let's pretend that we're trying to figure out how many streetlights to produce. And our first citizen, Bob, has a marginal personal benefit. His willingness to pay is listed in the graph or in the chart. He's willing to pay $10 for one streetlight. He gets a marginal benefit of $8 for a second streetlight, $6 for a third, $4 in marginal benefit for the fourth, $2 for the fifth. If the marginal cost of producing streetlights is $12, then Bob's going to be living in the dark. Bob's not going to install a streetlight because he has at no point a marginal benefit greater than the marginal cost. So as far as Bob's concerned, he's happy without light. Sandy, on the other hand, likes light. And so Sandy gets a marginal benefit of $18 for the first street light, $15 in marginal benefit for the second, and so on, as you see in the chart. So when it comes to how many streetlights would Sandy want to produce, well, Sandy on her own would be happy to produce 3 streetlights, because it is at the third streetlight where the marginal benefit for Sandy is equal to the marginal cost of producing the streetlight, and so Sandy will stop at 3. How many streetlights would these two have if they were to pool their resources and pool themselves together and work collectively? Well, we would see that Bob's marginal benefit is in the first column. Sandy's marginal benefit is in the second. Those are all their personal benefits. The social benefit is the sum of these two. So the sum of those two, the marginal social benefit, would lead us to not producing 0, which is what Bob would do on his own. It wouldn't lead us to producing 3, which is what Sandy would do on her own. It would instead lead to 4 streetlights. So again, there is a underproduction here when left to our own devices. But when we pool together, when an institution like the government produces these streetlights, then we see an increase in the production, because the social benefit is the personal benefits added together, and we see that at 4 streetlights, the marginal social benefit is greater than the marginal cost of producing each streetlight. And so we would actually end up producing more when government provides these goods, which is why these public goods tend to be provided by the government, because left alone, they won't be produced, or won't be produced in sufficient quantities to reach the socially optimal point. Another type of good is what's known as artificially scarce goods. These are goods that are excludable. I can stop you from accessing them, but they are non-rival in consumption. One person's consumption doesn't affect another person's consumption of the good, which means essentially that the marginal cost is 0 for producing these goods. Music downloads, the cost of an additional download is negligible. College classes, there is no additional financial cost to the university to have one more person in the classroom. Or a computer program, again, downloaded off the internet. The marginal cost of that is 0. They're artificially scarce because there is a price associated with them. Due to their excludability, even though the marginal cost is 0, there will be a price associated with it. And so there will be fewer of these goods consumed than would be socially optimal. If you think back to when we talked about product markets, anytime price is greater than marginal cost, you have a certain level of inefficiency, you have a certain amount of deadweight loss. And so there is a market failure here with artificially scarce goods. The final type of good is what we call common resources. And these are goods that I cannot stop you from accessing them, but your decision to access the good prevents me from accessing that same good. So fish in the ocean, for example, crabbing, is a common resource. I can't stop you from going out on a boat and catching crab. And if you don't catch the crab, then I will, and vice versa. And so we have an incentive to overproduce these particular goods. It leads to what's known as the tragedy of the commons. In the tragedy of the commons, you think back to like 1700s England, where maybe you're a shepherd and you're coming into town and you're going to bring your flock into town so that you can conduct your business, and there's a town green where your animal can graze while you're busy taking care of business. The problem, so it is non-excludable. Everybody can come in and leave their animals to graze while they do work. The problem is that that grass is rival. If my animal's eating it, yours isn't, and vice versa. And the reason it's called the tragedy of the commons is because this common resource is available for everybody, but what happens is if I don't have my animals graze, you will, which means there's none left for me. So I'd better be sure to get my animals there as fast as I can so they can be busy grazing. And because everyone is busy trying to have their animals graze on this common resource, it gets consumed immediately and there's nothing left long term. And that's a problem. So what do we do about it? one solution would be to give property rights to people, to say this town green is going to be subdivided. We're going to make it excludable, which would then transfer it from being a common pool resource to a private resource. If I'm excluding you from certain portions of that grass because this portion is mine and that portion is yours, then we have an incentive to maintain it, to not over consume it, because if we over consume our land, it's no longer available to us. And so these common pool resource problems are solved through things like licenses and creating property rights, which prevent people from over consuming the goods. I encourage you to look at the problem set and to work through trying to get a handle on these different types of goods, and I will talk to you next time.